My name Josh. I'm 24. Moved to the city a little over a year ago, thinking things might finally start lining up. They didn't. Freelance gigs came and went. Rent went up, then my roommate bailed. I had about 2 weeks of stability before I started crashing on couches, juggling invoices and cheap takeout and trying not to panic. That's when my buddy Don offered his place for a few nights. Said his mom wouldn't mind. There's a guest room. She's chill. You'll be fine. I didn't really have options. I packed a duffel and Ubered over. I'd been to Don's house before, a bunch of times, actually. Back in college, when we were doing group projects or grabbing pizza on the weekends. It always had this calm feel, like time moved slower there. His mom, Pamela, was around 40. I remembered her vaguely from those visits, always low-key, warm, the kind of person who didn't say much but made you feel like you belonged just by handing you a mug of tea or asking how finals were going. When I got there this time, Don wasn't home yet. He texted that he was stuck at work, but I should go ahead. So I rang the doorbell, trying to keep my expectations neutral. Pamela opened the door. I hadn't seen her in over a year. I remembered her being attractive, but this was different. She looked striking, confident in a way that doesn't beg for attention because it doesn't need to. Her hair was tied up casually, and she was in an oversized white shirt that fell just below her thighs. No shoes. No makeup. "Oh, it's you," she said, smiling. "Come in. I'm alone." That hit me in a way it probably shouldn't have. Not because of how she said it. It wasn't flirtatious. It was just honest. But I heard it like it meant something else. I followed her inside. The light was soft and golden, spilling in through the windows. It caught the edges of her silhouette as she walked, and for a second, I had to force myself not to stare. That t-shirt, the way it hung, the way she moved, everything about her presence felt effortless. Grounded. She poured iced tea into 2 glasses and sat across from me at the kitchen island. We talked. About Dawn, about school, about music. She asked how I was holding up, and it didn't feel like small talk. She looked directly at me when she listened, like she meant it. "You're one of the only friends Dawn brings around who seems grounded," she said. "You're calm." I like that. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just smiled. "Thanks. I try." At some point, she laughed and pulled at the hem of her shirt. "Sorry, I must look like a total mess." "You look good," I said, then immediately fumbled. Fine. She laughed. "Relax, Josh. I'm just teasing." We watched an old black and white movie after that. One of those films where nothing really happens, but it feels like something important is always just beneath the surface. She took one end of the couch. I took the other. A few times, I caught her glancing at me. I glanced back. Nothing happened, not then. But something shifted. I felt it. We both did. That night, I laid awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Just kindness. Just politeness. The next morning, when she walked into the kitchen wearing the same white shirt and nothing else, hair still damp from a shower, she paused. Looked me straight in the eye. "Do you always look like that?" She said it like it wasn't a joke. And I didn't have an answer. That question, "Do you always look like that?" It hung in the air longer than it should have. I managed a nervous smile, mumbled something like "didn't sleep much," and turned back to my cereal like that would fix anything. But nothing was the same after that. Not really. The next couple of days were quiet. Dawn had a last-minute work trip out of town. I was still crashing at their place, trying not to overstay my welcome, but Pamela didn't seem to mind. She'd say things like, "You're easy to have around," and I'd pretend I didn't hear the subtext. Friday evening, we were alone again. The light in the living room was dim, a little storm rolling in outside. She came in holding 2 mugs of tea, sat next to me instead of across. Her voice had a different texture, softer, slower, like each word mattered. "We have 2 days," she said. "I don't want to waste them in silence." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't have to. There was no big moment. No dramatic music or sudden rush. Just space shrinking, breath catching, hands brushing against each other like maybe it was accidental, but we both knew it wasn't. She sat closer. I shifted toward her. Her leg pressed lightly against mine. Everything about it felt deliberate, slow, conscious. She looked at me like I was someone she'd known longer than I'd been alive. Like I wasn't just a guest or her son's friend or some 20-something drifter with nowhere else to be. I was something else now, someone she'd allowed into a space she didn't usually open. And me? I couldn't move. Her hand found mine. Warm. Steady. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said quietly. "I just don't want to pretend anymore." I nodded. My throat was dry, but there was no fear in me, just the weight of something too real to name. We didn't kiss right away. We didn't even say anything else. We just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, fingers laced. The kind of silence that fills a room, not empties it. Later that night, we cooked dinner together. Something simple. Pasta, I think. She chopped tomatoes while I stirred the pot. It felt like something we'd done 100 times before, even though it was the first. She laughed at something I said about school. I don't even remember what. Just that the sound of her laughter made me feel steady for the first time in weeks. Afterward, we sat on the couch again. Her feet were in my lap. A blanket was tossed over both of us. We watched some movie, not really watching. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder. At one point, she looked up at me and said, "I haven't felt this alive in a long time." I didn't answer. I couldn't. But I reached for her hand and held it, gently. That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room. I slept on the couch. Alone. But I didn't need dreams. I already knew I wouldn't forget how it felt to have her breathe near me, or the way her voice softened when she spoke into the dark. Saturday was more of the same. Slow. Quiet. We walked around the block once, not touching, not talking. Just walking together like it was normal. Like we weren't constantly standing at the edge of something we shouldn't cross. That evening, I washed dishes while she dried. She bumped into me on purpose, I think. Smiled at me. Looked away quickly. And when she reached up to put a glass on the top shelf, she said softly, "You make this house feel full." That night, we sat even closer. When she kissed me, it was like she was apologizing for not doing it sooner. Sunday morning came with a kind of stillness that felt like the end of something. The air was heavier. The sunlight through the window looked different, softer, sadder, like it knew. Pamela and I moved around the kitchen quietly. No music. No jokes. She made coffee, I toasted bread. We passed things to each other without speaking. Not cold, just quiet. Like we were both already mourning something that hadn't ended yet. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost flat. "This can't go on." Not a question. Not a discussion. I nodded. There was nothing to say. We both knew it. What happened? Those 2 days, it lived in some space outside the rules. Outside of Dawn. Outside of reality. And now it had to be put back. I packed my things. The duffel bag I arrived with felt heavier, like it had absorbed everything that had happened between us. Before I left, she hugged me. No kiss. Just arms around me, held longer than necessary. I could feel her breath catch against my neck. Her fingers pressed into my back like she was afraid to let go. When she did, she stepped away quickly. She didn't walk me to the door. Didn't say goodbye. I opened it myself. Outside, the day looked normal. But I wasn't. I moved out that same afternoon. Don texted asking how the place had been. I told him thanks. Didn't mention anything else. I found a small place downtown. Shared kitchen, creaky floors, thin walls, but it was mine. I dove into work. Picked up more freelance gigs. Told myself it was all just a moment, a blur. Nothing lasting. But everything reminded me of her. Not the dramatic things. Not her voice or her face or the sound of her laugh, although those hit me too. It was the subtle things. Vanilla-scented candles. A certain shade of light at 5:30 p.m. The way quiet feels when someone you care about is in the same room but doesn't have to say anything. Even the way a dish towel hung slightly off-center on the oven handle, she always did that. It got to me in places I didn't expect. Random songs. Grocery aisles. Mornings when I'd make 2 cups of coffee by accident. I never told anyone. Not Dawn. Not my friends. Not even in some journal entry or a note to myself. It wasn't shame. It was protection. Like if I said it out loud, I'd ruin it. It would stop being ours. Weeks passed. Then months. I started dating again, sort of. Met people on apps. Went on a few coffees, a dinner or 2. But nothing ever really clicked. They were all nice, normal. But when they laughed, I didn't laugh with them the same way. When they touched my hand, it didn't land the same. I kept thinking, maybe it was just timing. Maybe I'd forget eventually. But forgetting isn't the same as healing. And I wasn't doing either. Almost a year later, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. Simple. No emojis. No punctuation. "You left something here. Worth coming by." I knew who it was. My stomach flipped. I reread it 6 times. My first instinct was to ignore it. Pretend it didn't pull at me. But that night, I drove there. The house looked the same. Porch light on. Curtains drawn. That strange feeling of nostalgia mixed with dread tightened in my chest. She opened the door. She looked almost exactly the same, maybe a little more tired around the eyes. But the way she looked at me calm, like no time had passed. I stepped inside. She didn't smile, just nodded, like this was what was supposed to happen. We talked. Small things. Weather. Work. She asked if I was still doing graphic design. I asked if Don had moved out yet. Turns out he had, months ago. And then, without really meaning to, I asked, "Do you regret it?" She didn't hesitate. Just said, "I only regret that I wanted again." And I believed her. But we both knew it couldn't start over. Not really. We hugged longer than we should have, but with restraint. There was no kiss. No second wave. Just that familiar closeness. Then I left. That night, after leaving her house, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage or regret. Just silence, deep, wordless silence that wrapped around me and didn't let go. Like the house itself had gone quiet out of respect for whatever that was we'd reopened. It wasn't closure. Not really. But it was something. A moment that didn't try to fix the past or restart it. It just let it breathe. And maybe that's why I remember it so clearly. After that, the quiet between us felt settled. Like we'd said all we were allowed to. We didn't text. We didn't find reasons to accidentally cross paths. We just stopped. But the echo of her never did. I'd catch myself walking slower past bakeries that smelled like the cinnamon she used in her tea. Or pausing at the sound of bare feet on hardwood floors in a neighbor's apartment, heart racing like it was her. Which made no sense. But that's what longing does, it rewires logic. I tried harder to move on. I started working more, took on a long-term contract that ate up my weekends. I joined a gym, went to trivia nights with coworkers, even let a friend set me up with someone. She was sweet, wore glasses, talked about books. But I couldn't tell her anything real. Not the parts that mattered. Not the part about why I flinched when she touched my wrist during dinner. Not the part where I spent most of the night comparing her to a woman I had no business thinking about. It wasn't fair to her. So I didn't let it go far. I stopped dating after that for a while. I stopped pretending I was okay. And in a weird way, that helped. Because admitting I still thought about Pamela didn't feel like a confession anymore. It just felt honest. Like saying, I miss home, even when you know you can't go back. One rainy Saturday, about 2 months after our last talk, I found myself walking past her neighborhood. I don't even remember why. I wasn't thinking, just wandering, headphones in, head down. I looked up, and there it was, the street. Her street. And my feet slowed before I could stop them. I didn't go to her door. Didn't knock or look for signs she was home. I just stood across the street like some ghost retracing his old life. Everything looked the same. Porch light off. Same mailbox. Same little wind chimes she always claimed were for the birds, not for show. I didn't expect to feel anything. I just expected closure. But what I felt wasn't closure. It was knowing that some chapters don't end neatly. They just stop getting written. I walked away. A few more months passed. Don and I saw each other once or twice, nothing serious. He was busy with work, new girlfriend, all that. He never brought up the time I stayed at his place. Never asked if anything weird happened. I always wondered if he'd sensed it. I guess part of me was waiting for the universe to do something, drop some big sign that it was time to move on for good, or that maybe I'd run into Pamela one last time, and we'd both nod and know we were okay. But no big signs came. Just life. Just regular, slow, complicated life. And sometimes, I'd still dream of her. Not in the way you might think. Not about kisses or couches or late-night confessions. But about grocery stores. About standing next to her in line at a coffee shop. About sitting beside her in silence and feeling like nothing had to be said. That was the part one missed most. The quiet that didn't ask for anything in return. It happened slowly, the way some things unravel when no one's pulling the thread, but it comes undone anyway. I saw Don again, grabbed coffee near campus. He told me his mom was doing well. Mentioned she was thinking of selling the house. Downsizing maybe. Said it offhandedly, like it was just a line in conversation, but it hit me harder than I let on. After we parted ways, I walked a few blocks and just sat on a bench. Didn't even check my phone. I just sat there, thinking about that living room. That kitchen island. The blanket on the couch. The hum of the fridge late at night. Places can hold people long after they've gone. I realized I was still carrying parts of her too. Not memories, not exactly. More like sensations. The feel of her voice. The rhythm of how she breathed when she was thinking. The way she'd let silence stretch between us without needing to fill it. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I wrote her a letter. Didn't send it. Didn't even put a stamp on the envelope. Just wrote it and folded it in half and tucked it into the back of a drawer I rarely open. It wasn't a goodbye, just an acknowledgement. A thank you for something that wasn't supposed to happen, but did. A few weeks later, I ran into her. Completely unplanned. I was walking into a bookstore, one I barely went to, and she was walking out. We almost bumped into each other. She looked surprised, but not shocked. Just quiet. We stood there for a second before either of us spoke. "Hey," I said. The word caught in my throat a little. "Hi," she replied. No smile, but not cold. We stepped to the side, out of the way of other people. Neither of us asked the obvious question. "How have you been?" We just stood there, and I realized this was probably it. This moment. The last flicker of whatever this had been. "I heard you might be selling the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded. "It's time." I didn't ask what that meant. I just nodded too. "I think about it," she said. "What we were. What that time was." I swallowed. "Same. I don't regret it," she added. "Neither do I." Then came the pause. The one I knew would come. The silence that was heavier than anything we could have said. "I still have that blanket," she said quietly. "The one from the couch." I gave a small laugh. "You always did like soft things." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened. "I'm not going to ask if you're happy," I said. "That feels unfair." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." We didn't hug this time. We didn't touch. But we stood there long enough to say everything without saying anything. When I finally turned to leave, she said one last thing. "Take care of yourself, Josh." I looked back, not fully turning around. "You too, Pamela." And that was it. No someday. No maybe. Just the end. Not dramatic, not tragic. Just honest. And strangely, that made it hurt more. Because some things fade, not because they weren't real, but because they were. That night, I opened the drawer and took out the letter I'd written weeks before. I didn't read it, just held it for a while, then folded it tighter and slid it into a box of old postcards I never sent. Some stories don't need a second chapter. They just live quietly in you, whispering reminders when the rest of the world is loud. After that day at the bookstore, everything shifted. Not dramatically, just subtly. Like the way sunlight moves across a room. You don't notice it changing until suddenly everything looks different. I moved again. Found a place on the second floor of a brick walk-up near the park. Small kitchen, creaky floors, warm light in the late afternoon. The kind of place that doesn't look like much but feels right when it's quiet. And I guess that's what I wanted most, quiet. Not the empty kind. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. I filled the space with books, mismatched mugs, plants I didn't know how to care for but tried anyway. I worked more. Took fewer breaks. Ate late dinners alone with my headphones in. But Pamela lingered. Not like a ghost, not haunting. More like gravity. Subtle. Constant. It was in the way I folded my laundry. The way I stood in doorways, thinking. The way I caught myself smiling at the sound of old jazz playing from the neighbor's apartment below. Even when I wasn't thinking about her, I was thinking about her. I saw someone once, a girl from my building. We got along fine. Grabbed coffee, talked about movies, made each other laugh. She wore oversized sweaters and had freckles across her nose. But one night, she leaned in and kissed me, and I realized, in the middle of that kiss, I was somewhere else entirely. I pulled back, gently. Apologized. She nodded, quietly. She wasn't angry. Just disappointed. "Still not over her?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. There's something about certain people, they leave impressions on you that don't fade with time. They etch themselves into the way you move, the way you pause before speaking, the way you notice someone folding their hands when they're nervous. Pamela was that person for me. And it wasn't because of what we did. It wasn't the kisses or the way she whispered my name when the world was asleep. It was how she made space for me. How she saw past the version of myself I pretended to be and looked straight at the part one never showed anyone else. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even right. But it was real. One evening, I found myself back in her neighborhood. I wasn't planning on it. I'd taken a wrong turn or maybe just followed a road that felt familiar. I parked at the end of the street and just sat there. The house was dark. For sale sign in the yard. No wind chimes. No porch light. It felt smaller than I remembered. Like it had shrunk in her absence. I didn't get out. I didn't need to. Just seeing it quiet, empty, waiting felt like enough. I thought about the time she said, "You make this house feel full." And I wondered if it had ever felt full since. Later that week, I opened a new project at work. A design gig for a nonprofit that helped women in transition, leaving marriages, starting over. I thought of her immediately. What she said about not feeling alive. About being tired of pretending. I almost reached out. Just to say that I got it. That I still heard her voice when I passed the vanilla candle aisle at the grocery store. That some afternoons, when the light hit my floor just right, it felt like I was back on her couch, wrapped in something I couldn't explain. But I didn't. Because part of loving someone, even quietly, even when you're not supposed to, is knowing when not to knock on their door again. Nearly a year had passed. Not a dramatic year, no wild changes or heartbreaks or new beginnings. Just time. Moving forward, inch by inch. And I had let it. I let it carry me. I let it put distance between what happened and where I was now. Until one day, a message blinked onto my phone. No name, just a number I hadn't seen in months. You left something here. That was it. I stared at it for a long time. Thought maybe it was a mistake. Or maybe I'd imagined it, projected some wish onto a random notification. But then it buzzed again. It's worth running over. I didn't ask what it was. Didn't ask why now. I just went. The house looked the same, but everything around it didn't. Different car in the driveway. Curtains drawn. A for sale sign now bent slightly from the wind. But the porch light was on. She opened the door like she'd been waiting. Pamela. No makeup. No pretense. Just a simple shirt, hair tucked behind her ears, like the version of herself I always remembered best. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Maybe she hadn't expected me to come. But then they softened, like, of course you came. We didn't hug. We didn't say hello. She stepped aside. I walked in. The house was quiet. Emptier. A few boxes stacked against the walls. No pictures on the shelves. Even the couch looked different without the blanket. I stood in the living room while she rummaged in a drawer. This, she said, holding out an old flash drive, the one Dawn and I had used for school stuff. I almost laughed. I forgot that even existed. She nodded. I didn't. We talked. About small things. She asked how work was. I asked if she was moving for good. She said yes, but didn't elaborate. Then, because I couldn't stop myself, I asked, do you regret it? She was quiet for a beat. Then, without looking at me, I only regret that I want it again. The words hit me hard, but soft too. Like they didn't want to hurt. They just wanted to exist. I looked at her. She looked back. There was a pause, like the kind that used to mean something was about to happen. But it didn't. We both knew there wouldn't be a repeat. That whatever we'd been, whatever that space between us had once held, it had already run its course. I'm glad you came, she said. Even if it's just to say goodbye. We hugged. The last one. It wasn't short, but it wasn't long either. It was full. Full of things we'd never get to say, and things we didn't have to. And when we stepped back, neither of us looked away. I hope, she started, then stopped. No. Never mind. What? She shook her head gently. Some things are better left where they were. I nodded. She opened the door. I stepped out into the cool air. She didn't close it right away. Just stood there, watching me walk down the steps. No wave. No smile. Just presence. And when the door finally shut, it didn't slam. It clicked. Soft, quiet, final. That night, I lay awake. No music. No phone in my hand. Just the sound of the city humming outside my window. I stared at the ceiling like it might give me an answer. But it didn't. Because some stories don't need a sequel. They end where it still hurts. Where there's still want. Still breath. Maybe that's why they stay with us. Not because they were perfect, or lasted, or ended the right way. But because they meant something. Because, for a moment, they were everything. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.